I talk a lot about the winter, specifically the beginning part of the year, and the spring and summer of 2019, because while the year began kind of rocky, I was watching a lot of anime that I really liked. I was just laying in my bed, watching anime. It's all I wanted to do. There were still some lingering personal traumas because there was a person who I kept being in a on and off relationship with out of fear of them killing themselves, among other forms of guilt that were sort of coloring our entire experience together. It felt like something I wasn't able to get out of. I just kept going back and forth. That wasn't a good experience. I was also in a friend group, the only friend group I had at the time, who actively thought caring about gender made you a bad person. It's a real quote. It made you a bad person. So I had to actively suppress my own identity as much as I possibly could, because the year before, I lost the most important friend group I had ever had, people whom I had spoken with on a day-to-day basis, sometimes for hours a day, people who I saw myself as being very close with. I didn't want to lose that friend group, and so I adapted my way of doing things to suit them, because I saw it as, if I don't get it right with these people, then I'm going to get it wrong like I did with those people. Even though a lot of the circumstances that led me to getting it wrong with those people were out of my control. I was on antipsychotic medication that made me feel like Joker. If you've seen Joker 2019, you'd probably get an idea of what I'm talking about. I suddenly wanted to kill people constantly, all the time. I never had a homicidal bone in my body before taking those antipsychotics, outside of some isolated instances in middle school, and that was largely in the realm of fantasy, something that most people could probably relate to one extent or another, nothing extreme. But all of a sudden I wanted to kill people all the time. All of a sudden I found myself losing more and more control over my behaviors. I found myself emotionally detached from everything, but gaining pleasure from hurting things, hurting people. I did not understand what was going on or what my reality was. I talk about not being able to enjoy anything now. I could not enjoy anything. There's not a thought in the world that would entertain me. Not a thing I could do that wouldn't fill me with such immense pain that it's kind of insane that I even survived being on those medicines, because it's like it turns the world around you into nothing but, it's not even gray, it's just immensely painful to exist like that. And so I started turning to more and more compulsive behaviors. My thinking was very disorganized. I couldn't think properly. And I was basically like Joker. That's how I was acting. This was in addition to, and we're talking 2018 here, where all of this went down when I lost this friend group, when I had moved throughout 5 different states, oftentimes within very short time spans of one another, living in all of these different places throughout these states, barely having money, my mom abusing me and threatening me, and having to deal with talking her out of suicide and these kind of things. It was one after another, over and over and over again, bad thing after bad thing happened. It was a terrible year. The worst year of my life, 2018. And I just so happened to make some mistakes and say some things. Didn't make me look so good. And there goes the friend group who I had expected to be supportive of me. Gone. 2019 comes around. I'm starting to come to terms with the fact that they're gone, kind of. And I'm just existing in my own comfy space. I'm still tormented by the memories of the things that happened, and they're still occupying my mind, but I'm able to live with them. I watch a lot of anime in the beginning months, and then spring comes, and a lot of it is just me completely locked in my room. Really pre-spring, before spring started, it started just being me locked in my room. I blacked out all the curtains, or all the windows, I should say, with the curtains and a blanket. I barely left my bed. I had my laptop. My laptop was pretty much my main interface with the world at that point. It's just my laptop. You saw a lot of videos of me just filming my screen at that time, a lot of videos of me just in a dark room. If you watch the video Astral Projection 2, you'll get a good sense of what I'm talking about here. Or, I mean, 3, I guess, is an even better representation of it, because so much of it is just clips from that time that were taken in the dark. But if you want a shorter version, I'd watch the number 2 video. And if you just go back to that time, you really get the sense that I was completely locked in my room. I wasn't anywhere else. I would piss in bottles oftentimes. I would only go to the bathroom late into the night when everyone was asleep. I did as much as I possibly could to minimize my interactions with other physical people, to the point where I had done it so long that I started getting anxiety that I didn't have before. And that may sound kind of nuts to you, spend a couple months in your room without any other people around. But I noticed aspects of my anxiety were heightening, where they hadn't existed before. I also was drinking a lot at this time, which was really fun, because I know I'd started drinking when I was 15, but I hadn't really had much access to liquor per se before, or at least I was unwilling to try and drink it to any significant degree. But there I was, drinking a lot more, and that was fun. I had a lot of fun doing that. It was like a new thing I was experimenting with, even though, again, I had previous experiences with it, just not often experiences with it. When it becomes a thing that's often, it's novel, because you're really testing your limits and figuring out, how much can I or can I not drink. That was fun. I didn't leave my room. I was just in my room, and it felt like my room was my own world. That anything that I could want to do, I would be listening to some tanky live stream, going into the history of this or that, and I'd have that to look forward to at one point in the week. I'd have all of these no thank you videos queued up, ready to listen to. I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time, while playing CS and other computer games on my laptop, again in my bed, just laying in my bed completely in the dark for that whole period of time. Sometimes going on my computer to say something to another person, but it was just that. And that feeling of stability, that feeling of bliss, like you are completely detached from any understanding of the outside world, you just are in your own world. It was such a breathtaking thing to experience. And I look at myself now and I think I'm unable to experience that, because the newness of the things that were new at the time, the sense that I was getting better at explaining my own ideology when now I don't even have an ideology, the sense that I could just endlessly record in my room and I'd have all of these things to say, because finally I got to a point with being able to speak and express ideas that I could express all these ideas that I've wanted to express for so long, and now I can finally say them. Now I can finally get them out. It was one after another. Boom, 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 one after another. They were out there. I constructed narratives about myself that were ultimately untrue, that were based in, again, that antipsychotic string of experiences, some of which were cruel in nature, that led me to identify with a version of myself that was more reflective of characterizations given to me by other people than of reality. There were a few videos that reflected that. Some might call it the edgy arc of me talking about, being cold and unemotional. I believe I called myself a sociopath during that time as well. But that didn't last long. Soon I got wind that, letting the cat out of the bag, there wasn't really a cat there, so it was kind of silly. It was kind of silly, kind of a meme. Quickly I said, yeah, that was kind of a silly meme. But I didn't know how to say that. I didn't know how to present that in a coherent way, so it was kind of like I was halfway keeping up the the old act for consistency's sake, which is another massive problem I've had. I had been so obsessed for so long with the idea of clarifying how consistent I was. Even when I was being blatantly inconsistent, I would just keep clarifying that I was consistent because I was so terrified of people calling me inconsistent, which was a result of trauma, again, with that 2018 friend group I was telling you about, of just being called inconsistent so many times. It was like a trigger for me, and so I had to do every single possible thing I could to justify how consistent I was, even when it was blatantly false. And so even if I made a positive change, that in acknowledging that a way of viewing myself was actually incorrect, or a way of viewing the world was actually incorrect, I had to keep up the farce of believing it while slowly seeding those ideas into my audience to not get called inconsistent. That's how obsessed with it I was. I did not want to be perceived that way, because it triggered trauma with those people, when the only reason I was so inconsistent back then was because I was on psychoactive medicines that were actively damaging my brain and my ability to feel things and act like a normal human being. My entire personality changed during that time. Like, I can't emphasize that enough. And so when I was off those medicines, I was still dealing with trying to understand those experiences and the long-term trauma I had gotten from the way I had acted on them. And part of coming to terms with that was forming narratives about myself that I would ultimately find to be untrue, that were also incredibly difficult to let go of, because, again, that very specific trauma of not wanting to be seen as inconsistent. But I was happy in my room, more or less. I was depressed, but I was also enjoying the overall experience of being in my room. I was entertained, I was stimulated, there was the sense that things were moving up on my channel, I was having fun, and I was coming up with new ideas. As for the old ideas, finally being able to express them in a way I was satisfied with. The aesthetics of my videos felt that they were becoming more dynamic, that even though I was just in one dark room, I was finding new ways of expressing that dark room, and making it feel good for the viewer, which, based on the feedback that I got, seemed to have been doing its job. I was doing live streams all of a sudden, which was a completely new thing for me. I had done a few in the past, but just being able to whip out my phone and talk into it to stream after I hit 1K subs and I think it was a community guidelines dispute had been removed, it was amazing. I could stream at 3 a.m. from my bed and there were no problems. And I had no idea that I was being overheard by anyone else in the house the whole time. That was before I knew the walls were thin, so I felt as though I could freely speak about anything forever, and it was all natural, because I had no idea anyone was listening, and when I don't think anyone is listening, my speech is not colored by the anxiety of who might hear it. It's just me, all by myself. I perceived it that way, even though it wasn't that way, and because I perceived it that way, the result of my actions was different. My perception changed reality. Now that I know that the walls are thin, and that people can hear me all the time, I had to wait just to record this video when people were asleep. You get the idea here. Things were nicer because of the way I was perceiving the world. Things were nicer because I had the feeling that I was improving on something actively, that I was doing all these things that I had wanted to be able to do, that I was coming into my own style, coming into myself. And it was exciting. It was exciting to have so much freedom, to not be bound to any obligations or a long-term goal that was conducive to anything other than my own enjoyment. But there was another thing at this time as well. I was a Marxist. I had been a Marxist since year 2017, and I obsessively read about the subject, and I mean obsessively, as well as consumed content on the internet in other forms, but I read a lot. I cared very, very deeply about this subject, but not in a way that had any real world implications. It was entirely on the internet. And I don't mean entirely on the internet as in I got into arguments with lots and lots of people. It was more like I had one group of friends who liked speaking about it, and that was my only group of friends. And then I had myself who liked learning about it, and then that was it. No, there were no real world implications to anything I was doing or saying. I wrote videos that can still be found on YouTube on the channel Weeb Revolution, where I was very enthusiastic and I cared a lot about the things that I was saying, but I didn't really care about being right per se. I didn't care about being smarter than anybody else or being perceived a certain way by other people, at least not conducive to my own ego. It wasn't meant to prop myself up. It wasn't meant to make me feel like a better person or to be a more moral person. Those things have never particularly concerned me. There have been times when I've liked the image of being a good person, but only to make up for how chronically bad I feel about myself and in a desperate attempt to make up for past mistakes, and also memes that were placed on me by my family when these Christian-esque Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood type beats that all get thrown into our heads. Beyond those things, I've never, and that wasn't even a particularly long period of time that those worms were thrown around in there, I've never cared particularly strongly about being a good person, about being the moral center or above anybody else. I've been quicker to admonish, I believe that's the right word, my own morality by calling myself a bad person, which I've done way more times than calling myself a good person, than trying actively to present myself as good. It just hasn't been a concern to me. And so, because I didn't care about being more right than anybody else, because I only cared about justifying my beliefs to myself, to keep myself believing them, I acted as a sort of heel to other people in arguments should they arise. Because most people care about being smart. Most people care about how they can see themselves in relation to other people. That's never really meant that much to me. Like, not in this specific context, not in the political context. I don't want to feel like I'm more woke than you. I don't want to feel like I have everything figured out and I just know the magical answer. It may have seemed like that because of the ideology I had adopted, which its religious-esque goal is to kind of, make you transcend yourself as a leap of faith, because all of the answers are right there. But even that is implicitly stating that it's a leap of faith, that you don't know. There's always the acknowledgement that you don't know. There was the acknowledgement with me that I didn't know, but it was something I was willing to commit to, regardless. At least at the ideological level, which on the internet means nothing, because your actions have no material effect on the world if you believe them merely online. It's only for you internally. It was internal for me, but again, not internal in the sense that I wanted to be recognized by other people in a certain way, or to even recognize myself in relation to other people in a certain way. I merely wanted to believe, and when I would get into some of these arguments, I would be presented as someone who just believes that they're right about everything. You just believe you're right about everything. You don't know what's good about this or that. How can you believe these things? Why do you have to think you're so smart? How could you possibly know when you don't have this much experience, or haven't done this, or haven't done that, or aren't this old? Those questions didn't really matter. So I knew those things were true. It didn't matter whether those things were true. I just wanted to believe something. But because people assume that you're as enveloped in your own self-perception as they are, they will hit you with that line of attack as if you are. Because their own self-perception, like the way that they view the world, is going to be how they filter other people's way of looking at the world. That's going to be the lens they filter it through, because they are the thing that they're the most familiar with. You know yourself better than anything else, because it's the thing you have to deal with on a day-to-day basis. And so people tend to project, and because of their projection, they'll get into aggressive spats with people that are often uncharacteristic of the person that they're spatting at, or the accusations of them, I should say. And the problem with this, of course, is that it doesn't assess the needs of that other person, or why they might be thinking the things that they are, doing the things that they're doing. But of course, to most people, that doesn't matter, unless you're friends with them. But even then, that usually doesn't matter. What matters is, again, what you get out of the self-perception. What matters is owning someone online, being the better person in the room. Even if you completely reject morals, the behaviors of a moralist can come about. And it's just how it goes. But I felt like I believed something back then. And nowadays it doesn't really feel like I believe anything. And I think, at least back then, when I could believe something, when I could listen to other people who believed the same thing without immediately going to the same criticisms that I do every time, keeping me from enjoying what they have to say, because I find it repetitive and annoying. It was easier. It was easier back then when I could believe something, when I could remember something. Freudian slip there, as they say. When I could remember something. When I could remember something, yeah. That was a great time. Back when I could believe something, it felt like the world was a more positive place. I knew impending climate disaster was going to be the inevitable result of life, but at least I believed something about life. At least there was a group I could fall into and mourn the ashes of the world with. At least I could say that I have an ideology, a people, a group. I could immediately make friends with anyone who cared as much about the same thing. It was easier. Life felt more naive. I had this sense about life that I was unaware of the negative things, or I was unaware of certain negative things. I was just less aware in general of how pointless everything really is, of how many ideological spooks arise in your day-to-day life that are conducive to some kind of meaning or a sense of happiness, but are ultimately meaningless when you really think about them, that are holding you down in certain ways and maybe holding you up in others. But that's not really up to me to figure out in the first place, is it? Because I've already relinquished my ability to know. And ever since then I haven't been able to believe in something. More information I come across, the less and less it seems like anything can work, or any ideology defined as anything other than another religion. But I wasn't one of those bad religious people who wanted to impose my beliefs on anyone else. I wasn't one of those people who thought I was better than other people for having those beliefs. I wasn't one of those people who merely wanted to feel superior. If I wanted to feel superior, I would have let go of ideology from the beginning. If I wanted to be an outsider who understands the things that the masses don't, I would have just done that. I wanted to be a part of something. And even though I was there in my room for months, not leaving, barely leaving, I was entertained. I felt progress occurring, and I had something I believed. Now I try to record a video, and I keep getting lost in the fact that I can't speak as well as I used to, with as much confidence, with as much enthusiasm, or about subjects every single day that entice me, that I had always wanted to speak about and now had the newfound ability to speak about. I feel old now. I feel like I'm constantly witnessing my own decay, which is hilarious to say given how young I am, but that's how it feels when you compare the 2 years to one another. It feels like now I've settled in with my own content and can still do new things, but it's not the same. I can't just have a new thing that comes out every day that I'm so enthusiastic about. I can't just lay in a dark room and listen to podcasts all the time while mindlessly playing video games. I can't feel as though there's a global project that I'm a part of that I truly, truly believe in while ignoring everything else related to it. And I've become a better friend because of acknowledging the meaninglessness and the pointlessness of so many of these things that occupied my worldview. But I've only become a better friend because of those things. I've felt worse. The people who I may have been insulting to, or may have been a general annoyance to because of my own neuroticism, the same neuroticism that arises from every religious person, or at least most of them, the kind that you get from knowing that there are things in reality you have to actively ignore because they would otherwise contradict your worldview, and then just not doing anything about them. Just doing everything you can to obscure them and go, no, 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 this cannot possibly be true. I am going to sit with my group over here and not have anything to do with it. Neuroticism. Neuroticism is bred out of saying that on some level you do know, or at least make the leap of faith to knowing. Because there's evidence to the contrary all around you, and you just have to keep plugging your ears and acting as if it isn't there. But when I realized that I didn't know, I became less neurotic. I stopped caring. And as I stopped caring, I became an immensely more peaceful person to be around. Easier. That was good for the people around me. But it's just made me want to kill myself.